The blizzard hit without warning, turning the Dakota Territory into a white hell, and Evelyn Davenport knew she would die if she did not find shelter within the hour. Her fingers had gone numb inside her thin gloves. Her traveling dress offered no protection against the wind that cut through fabric like a knife through butter. And the horse she had been riding lay dead in a snowdrift 2 miles back after breaking its leg in a hidden gopher hole. She stumbled forward through snow that reached her knees, her curvy figure fighting against the elements with every labored step, her dark hair whipping free from its pins to lash at her frost-bitten cheeks. The November storm of 1873 was the worst anyone had seen in years, or so the station master in Yankton had warned her that morning. But Evelyn had been desperate to reach her aunt's homestead before nightfall, and desperation made fools of even the most sensible women. She heard the jingle of harness bells before she saw anything through the driving snow, a sound so unexpected that she thought perhaps she had begun to hallucinate from the cold. Then a dark shape materialized from the white curtain ahead, growing larger and more solid until she could make out a horse-drawn sleigh moving steadily through the storm. Evelyn tried to call out, but her voice emerged as barely a whisper, her throat too frozen to produce more than a croak. She waved her arms instead, throwing herself forward into the path of the approaching vehicle, knowing it was her only chance at survival even if it meant risking being trampled. The driver pulled hard on the reins, and the 2 massive draft horses came to a halt mere feet from where Evelyn had collapsed into the snow. She heard boots hitting the ground, heard a man's voice cursing the weather and the fool woman who had thrown herself in front of his team, and then strong hands were gripping her shoulders and turning her over. Through vision blurred by snow and encroaching darkness, she looked up into the face of the man who would save her life, though she did not know yet that he would also claim her heart. "What in God's name are you doing out here alone?" The voice was rough, tinged with anger born of fear, and belonged to a man somewhere in his late 20s with a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes were a startling blue even in the dim light of the storm, and a thick beard covered his jaw, coated now with ice and snow. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat and a wide-brimmed hat tied down with a scarf, dressed like someone who knew how to survive the brutal winters of the Dakota Territory. Evelyn tried to answer, but her teeth chattered too violently for words to form. The man muttered something she could not hear over the wind, then swept her up into his arms with surprising ease despite her substantial curves. She wanted to protest, wanted to maintain some shred of dignity, but survival instinct overrode pride, and she let herself be carried to the sleigh and deposited onto the bench seat. A heavy buffalo robe was wrapped around her shoulders, and then the man was climbing up beside her, taking up the reins again. "Hold on tight," he commanded, and she barely had time to grip the edge of the seat before the sleigh lurched forward, the horses straining against their harnesses as they pushed through the deepening snow. Evelyn lost track of time after that, focused only on the simple act of breathing, of staying conscious despite the cold that had seeped into her very bones. The man beside her said nothing more, all his attention on navigating through the blizzard, and she was grateful for his silence because she had no strength left for conversation. The world had narrowed to the space beneath the buffalo robe, to the gradually returning sensation in her fingers and toes that came with pins and needles of pain, to the solid presence of the stranger who had pulled her from death's grasp. When the sleigh finally stopped, Evelyn looked up to see a cabin materializing from the storm, a sturdy structure built of thick logs with smoke rising from a stone chimney. The man jumped down and came around to her side, reaching up to lift her again, and this time She had no strength to even pretend resistance. He carried her through a door that he kicked open with one boot, into a space warmed by a cast-iron stove and lit by kerosene lamps that cast golden pools of light across rough-hewn floors. "Can you stand?" he asked as he set her on her feet, keeping one hand on her elbow to steady her. Evelyn nodded, though her legs trembled beneath her skirts, and he guided her to a chair near the stove. "Stay here. Do not move. I need to see to the horses, and then I will tend to you." He was gone before she could respond, the door slamming shut behind him and letting in a gust of frigid air. Evelyn sat in the chair and tried to take stock of her situation. She was alive, which was more than she had expected half an hour ago. She was in the home of a stranger, a man whose name she did not even know, and the storm raging outside meant she would not be leaving any time soon. The proprieties that governed her life back in Philadelphia seemed absurdly distant now, irrelevant in the face of simple survival. She looked around the cabin, noting details that told her about its owner. The space was larger than she had expected, perhaps 20 feet by 30, with a sleeping area curtained off in one corner and a kitchen area near the stove. A table and chairs occupied the center of the room, and shelves lined one wall, holding supplies and provisions enough to see someone through a long winter. Everything was neat and orderly, the mark of a man who lived alone and took pride in his space. A gun rack near the door held 2 rifles and a shotgun, and various tools hung from pegs on the walls. It was the home of someone who worked with their hands, who understood that survival in this harsh land required preparation and discipline. The door opened again, letting in another blast of cold air along with the man who had rescued her. He stamped snow from his boots and removed his coat and hat, hanging them on pegs near the door, and Evelyn got her first clear look at her savior. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of someone who worked hard for a living. His hair was dark brown, shot through with lighter streaks from the sun, and curled slightly where it touched his collar. The beard could not hide the strong lines of his jaw, and his hands as he removed his gloves were large and capable, scarred from years of rough work. "I am Wyatt Rutherford," he said, moving to the stove to pour water from a kettle into a tin cup. "This is my ranch, or the winter cabin of it at any rate. The main ranch is 5 miles south, but I came up here yesterday to check on the line shack and got caught by the storm." He brought the cup to her, pressing it into her hands. "Drink this slowly. It is just water, but it is warm." Evelyn wrapped her stiff fingers around the cup, grateful for its heat. "I am Evelyn Davenport. I was traveling from Yankton to my aunt's homestead when the storm hit. My horse went lame and I had to leave it." She sipped the water, feeling it warm a path down her throat. "Thank you for stopping." "I would have died out there." "Yes, you would have." Wyatt's tone was blunt, lacking any attempt to soften the truth. "What were you thinking, traveling alone in November? Even local folk know better than to venture out when a storm is brewing." Evelyn felt a flash of irritation cut through her exhaustion. "I was told the storm would not hit until evening. I thought I had time to reach my destination." "Weather does not care what you were told. It does what it pleases." Wyatt turned away to open a cupboard, pulling out supplies. "When did you last eat?" "This morning. I had breakfast at the hotel in Yankton." "Then you need food." He set about preparing a meal with efficient movements, and Evelyn watched in fascination as he sliced bacon into a cast-iron skillet and set it on the stove to sizzle. He cracked eggs into a bowl, added a splash of milk, and whisked them together with a fork. Biscuits came from a covered tin, and he split them open to warm on the stove. Within 15 minutes, he set a plate before her loaded with food, and her stomach growled loudly enough that she saw his mouth twitch in what might have been amusement. "Eat," he commanded, settling into a chair across from her with his own plate. "You will feel better with hot food in your belly." Evelyn needed no further encouragement. She ate with single-minded focus, her body crying out for the fuel it needed to recover from its ordeal. The food was simple but well prepared, and she found herself scraping the plate clean before she realized how unladylike her behavior must appear. When she looked up, she found Wyatt watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Better?" he asked. "Much, thank you." Evelyn set down her fork and made herself meet his gaze directly. "I owe you my life, Mr. Rutherford. I will find a way to repay you once I reach my aunt's place." "No repayment necessary. Out here we help each other. It is how we survive." He rose to collect their plates, carrying them to a basin near the stove. "But you will not be reaching your aunt's place anytime soon. That storm is going to last at least 2 days, maybe 3. And even after it passes, it will take time for the roads to be passable again." The reality of her situation began to sink in. "You mean I am trapped here? With you?" "I mean we are both trapped here together until the weather breaks." Wyatt began washing the dishes with the same efficiency he had shown in cooking. "I have supplies enough for 2, and there is plenty of wood for the stove. We will be uncomfortable, but we will survive." Uncomfortable was an understatement, Evelyn thought. She was an unmarried woman about to spend several days alone with a man she had just met, in close quarters with no chaperone. The scandal would ruin her if word got out, not that she had much reputation left to protect after fleeing Philadelphia under a cloud of disgrace. Still, old habits died hard, and she found herself calculating how to minimize the damage to her already tattered respectability. "I will sleep by the stove," she said. "You may have your bed." Wyatt turned to look at her, one eyebrow raised. "The bed is in the only warm corner of the cabin near the stove. You will freeze anywhere else. We are both adults, Miss Davenport, and we both need to survive this storm. I will rig up a better curtain for privacy and we will manage." There was no arguing with his logic, much as Evelyn wanted to. She nodded stiffly, too tired to protest further. The meal and the warmth of the cabin had combined to make her suddenly aware of how exhausted she was, how close she had come to death. Her hands began to shake, and she gripped the edge of the table to hide the tremor. "You are going into shock," Wyatt said, crossing to her side in 2 long strides. "It is normal after what you have been through. Come, you need to rest." He guided her to the curtained sleeping area, and she saw that he had already pulled out extra blankets and laid them on the narrow bed. "Change out of those wet things. There is a nightshirt hanging on that peg that will do for you. I will be out by the stove, and I will not look." Evelyn waited until he had pulled the curtain closed before she began the laborious process of removing her traveling dress. Her fingers still did not work quite right, and the buttons seemed impossibly small, but eventually she managed to strip down to her chemise and drawers. Both were damp from melted snow, and she hesitated only a moment before removing them as well. The nightshirt Wyatt had indicated was made of thick flannel, clearly meant for a man much larger than she was, and it hung on her curves like a tent. But it was warm and dry, and that was all that mattered. She climbed beneath the blankets and felt her body begin to relax for the first time in hours. The bed smelled of wood smoke and something else, something masculine and not unpleasant, and she found herself wondering about the man who had saved her life. Wyatt Rutherford. A rancher, by his own admission, living alone in this harsh country. What had brought him here? What kept him here when the winters were so brutal they could kill in a matter of hours? Sleep claimed her before she could pursue those questions further, pulling her down into darkness so complete she did not even dream. When Evelyn woke, she had no idea what time it was or how long she had slept. The cabin was dim, lit only by the glow of the stove, and when she pushed aside the curtain, she saw Wyatt sitting at the table, reading a book by the light of a kerosene lamp. He looked up at the sound of movement, and something in his expression softened when he saw her. "How do you feel?" he asked, setting the book aside. "Sore, tired, but alive." Evelyn ran a hand through her tangled hair, wincing as her fingers caught on snarls. "What time is it?" "Near midnight. You slept for almost 6 hours." Wyatt rose and moved to the stove, pouring coffee from a pot into a mug. "The storm is still raging. It has not let up at all." Evelyn accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "What were you reading?" "Shakespeare. The Tempest." He returned to his seat, and she saw the worn volume lying on the table. "I have read it a dozen times, but it passes the hours." She had not expected a rough rancher to be familiar with Shakespeare, and her surprise must have shown on her face because he smiled slightly. "I was not always a cattleman, Miss Davenport. I had another life before I came west." "What kind of life?" "The kind that taught me to read, but not much else that was useful." His tone discouraged further questions, and Evelyn let the subject drop. They all had pasts they preferred not to discuss, herself included. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the wind howl around the cabin and the crackle of burning wood in the stove. Evelyn studied Wyatt covertly over the rim of her mug, noting the way lamplight caught in his dark hair, the strong lines of his profile, the easy way he occupied space, as though he had nothing to prove. He was attractive, she realized, in a way that had nothing to do with conventional handsomeness and everything to do with competence and quiet strength. "Tell me about your aunt," Wyatt said, breaking the silence. "The one you were traveling to see. Her name is Margaret." "She is my mother's older sister, and she came west 5 years ago after her husband died. She claims she loves the freedom of it, the space." Evelyn shrugged. "I always thought she was mad, but now I understand a bit better. Sometimes a woman needs to escape." "Escape from what?" Evelyn hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But what did it matter? This man had saved her life, and they were trapped together for days. She might as well be honest. "From a broken engagement, from a family that wanted me to marry for money and position rather than affection. From a city full of people who looked at me with pity or scorn depending on their nature." Broken engagement. Wyatt's tone was carefully neutral. "He decided 3 weeks before the wedding that he preferred my younger, thinner, prettier cousin." The words came out more bitter than Evelyn intended. "Apparently, my curves were acceptable when hidden beneath a corset and fancy dresses, but the thought of actually living with them was too much for his refined sensibilities. Then he was a fool." The simple statement, delivered without a trace of flattery or false comfort, made something tight in Evelyn's chest loosen slightly. "Perhaps. But he was not wrong that I am not the sort of woman men dream of marrying. Out here, men dream of marrying women who are strong enough to survive the winters, smart enough to help run a ranch, and brave enough to face down whatever the land throws at them." Wyatt met her eyes directly. "From what I have seen so far, you have at least 2 of those 3 qualities, and I suspect the third will show itself in time." Evelyn felt heat rising to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the warmth of the cabin. "You barely know me, Mr. Rutherford. Call me Wyatt." "And you are right. I barely know you. But I know you did not panic when you were freezing to death. I know you ate without complaint and did not weep or carry on about the impropriety of our situation. I know you are sitting here talking to me like a sensible person instead of having hysterics. Those things tell me plenty." They talked long into the night, sharing stories and observations, and Evelyn found herself relaxing in a way she had not relaxed around a man in years. Wyatt did not try to charm her or impress her. He simply talked to her, as though her opinions mattered, as though she were worth listening to. It was a novel experience, and she found herself liking this taciturn cowboy far more than was probably wise given their circumstances. When exhaustion finally claimed her again, she returned to the bed and fell asleep to the sound of Wyatt moving quietly around the cabin, tending the fire and checking supplies. She felt safe, she realized. Despite being alone with a stranger in the middle of a blizzard, despite having nearly died that afternoon, she felt safer than she had in months. The storm lasted 3 days, just as Wyatt had predicted. 3 days of being confined to the small cabin, of learning to navigate around each other in the limited space, of discovering the rhythms of another person's life. Evelyn learned that Wyatt rose before dawn no matter what, that he was meticulous about maintaining his tools and equipment, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise. She learned that he had come west from Boston after his parents died in a fire, that he had worked as a ranch hand for 5 years before saving enough to buy his own land, that he loved this harsh country with a fierce passion that showed in every word when he spoke of it. Wyatt learned that Evelyn was well educated, that she had a gift for mathematics that her family had seen as eccentric at best, that she could cook when given proper ingredients and clear instructions. He learned that she had a temper that flared hot and fast but burned out just as quickly, that she laughed easily once she relaxed, that she hummed while she worked. He learned that her curves were not something she apologized for or tried to hide beneath borrowed nightshirts, that she moved with unconscious grace despite her size, that she was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with fashion or conventional standards. They played cards by lamplight, using dried beans for stakes and arguing good-naturedly over the rules. They read aloud to each other from Wyatt's small collection of books, and Evelyn discovered that he had a fine voice for reading, deep and expressive. They cooked together, creating meals from the supplies on hand, and Evelyn felt a strange contentment in the simple domesticity of it all. On the 3rd night, as the wind finally began to die down and the snow stopped falling, they sat together near the stove and Wyatt spoke of his ranch. "I have 200 acres and 50 head of cattle," he said. "It is not much by Texas standards, but it is mine. I built the main house myself, cut every log and fitted every joint. In the spring, I plan to buy more stock and expand the operation." "Do you run it alone?" Evelyn asked. "I have 2 hired hands who help with the heavy work, but yes, mostly I run it alone." He paused, then added quietly, "It is a lonely life sometimes, but it is a good life." Evelyn understood what he was not saying, heard the yearning beneath the words. "It must be hard, having no one to share it with." "Yes." Wyatt turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "But perhaps that will change." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with possibility and unspoken questions. Evelyn knew she should look away, should retreat to the safety of the sleeping area, but she could not make herself move. 3 days of proximity, of learning each other's habits and quirks, of talking and laughing and simply being together, had created something neither of them had intended. An attraction, certainly, but more than that. A recognition of kindred spirits, of 2 people who fit together despite coming from different worlds. "Evelyn," Wyatt said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to say something, and I need you to listen without interrupting." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "When I pulled you from that snowdrift, I thought I was just saving a foolish woman who had gotten herself into trouble. But these past 3 days, I have come to see you differently. You are strong and smart and funny and beautiful, and I find myself wanting things I have no right to want." He paused, searching for words. "The storm will break tomorrow and you will leave to find your aunt. but I am asking you to consider staying, not at this cabin, but at my ranch. As my wife, if you will have me." Evelyn stared at him, shocked into speechlessness. "You cannot mean that. You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you are not afraid of hard work. I know you do not flinch from difficult truths. I know that when you smile, it changes your whole face, and when you laugh, it fills this cabin with light." Wyatt leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. "I know this is sudden, and I know it is not what you planned. But sometimes the best things in life are not planned. Sometimes they just happen, like a woman throwing herself in front of your sleigh in the middle of a blizzard." "Wyatt, I do not know what to say." "Then do not say anything yet. The storm will break tomorrow, and we will make our way to the ranch. Come see it, meet my hired hands, see what the life would be like. If at the end of a week you want to go to your aunt's place, I will take you there myself and wish you well. But give me a chance to show you what we could have together." Evelyn's mind raced, trying to process what he was offering. Marriage to a man she had known for 3 days, a life on a remote ranch in the Dakota Territory, a future completely different from anything she had imagined. It was madness. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of impulsive decision that had gotten her into trouble before. And yet, something in her chest was singing at the thought of staying, of building a life with this quiet, steady man who read Shakespeare and made her laugh and looked at her like she was something precious. What did she have waiting for her in Philadelphia? Scandal and pity, and the same suffocating expectations that had driven her west in the first place. What did she have waiting at her aunt's homestead? The chance to be a spinster niece, dependent on the charity of others, forever marked by her broken engagement and failed prospects. Or she could take a chance. She could bet on this unexpected connection, this spark that had ignited between them in the warmth of the cabin while the storm raged outside. She could choose her own future for the first time in her life, instead of letting others choose it for her. "1 week," she said finally. "I will come to your ranch for 1 week, and then I will give you my answer." The smile that broke across Wyatt's face was like the sun coming out after the storm, and Evelyn felt her heart stutter in her chest. "1 week," he agreed. "That is all I ask." They traveled to the ranch the next morning, taking the sleigh across a landscape transformed by snow into something alien and beautiful. The sky was achingly blue, the sun so bright on the white drifts that Evelyn had to squint against the glare. Wyatt pointed out landmarks as they traveled, telling her the names of distant hills and frozen creeks, and she tried to memorize it all, this land that might become her home. The ranch house appeared in late afternoon, a sturdy structure of logs and stone nestled in a shallow valley. Smoke rose from its chimney, and as they approached, 2 men emerged from the barn, shading their eyes against the sun as they watched the sleighs approach. "Those are my hands," Wyatt said. "Joe Marsh and Tom Running Bear. Good men, both of them." Joe Marsh was a grizzled man in his 50s with a weathered face and shrewd eyes. Tom Running Bear was younger, perhaps 30, with the dark hair and high cheekbones that spoke of his Dakota heritage. Both men looked surprised to see Wyatt returning with a woman, but they hid it well behind polite nods and murmured greetings. "Found her in the storm," Wyatt explained briefly. "Miss Davenport will be staying with us for a bit. Joe, can your wife spare some time to act as chaperone?" "Sarah will be happy to help," Joe said, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "She has been saying you need a woman's influence around here for years." Wyatt showed Evelyn into the house, and she looked around with interest. The main room was large and open, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and windows that let in generous light. The furniture was simple but well made, and everything was clean and orderly. A loft above held sleeping quarters, and a door led to what appeared to be a separate bedroom. I built the bedroom for guests, Wyatt said, following her gaze. But I never have guests. You can stay there and Sarah Marsh can sleep in the loft to keep things proper. Sarah Marsh arrived within the hour, a plump, cheerful woman who took one look at Evelyn and immediately began fussing over her like a mother hen. You poor dear, caught in that terrible storm. Wyatt did right bringing you here. Now let us get you settled and find you some proper clothes. You cannot keep wearing that traveling dress. It is practically in tatters. The next week passed in a blur of activity and discovery. Sarah produced dresses from her own wardrobe, altered to fit Evelyn's curvier figure, and taught her the rhythms of ranch life. Evelyn learned to make bread that rose properly in the altitude, to churn butter until her arms ached, to preserve meat and vegetables for the long winter ahead. She learned to recognize the different calls of the cattle, to understand the patterns of weather that dictated the work of each day, to appreciate the stark beauty of the winter landscape. Wyatt was patient with her questions, including her in discussions of ranch management and future plans. He taught her to ride one of his gentler horses, laughing when she whooped with delight at the feeling of galloping across open ground. He showed her the line shacks scattered across his property, the water sources that kept the cattle alive through the dry summers, the places where wildflowers would bloom come spring. They talked endlessly, discovering shared opinions and debating differences. Evelyn found that Wyatt valued her mathematical skills, consulting her on problems of supply and cost that had been troubling him. She created ledgers and budgets, organizing the financial side of the ranch in ways that made him shake his head in wonder. "You have a gift for this," he said one evening as they reviewed her work. "I've been keeping track of things in my head, but seeing it written out like this, I can see where I have been losing money." "Numbers make sense to me," Evelyn said. "They are logical and predictable, unlike people." "Unlike men, you mean?" Wyatt's tone was gentle. "Not all of us are like your former fiancé, Evelyn. Some of us see value in more than just a pretty face." She looked up to find him watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. Over the past week, she had grown accustomed to his presence, to the sound of his voice and the warmth of his rare smiles. She had learned that he was unfailingly honest, sometimes to the point of bluntness, but that he was also kind in ways both large and small. She had seen how his hands treated the animals with gentleness, how he spoke to his hired men with respect, how he looked at her like she was the most interesting person in the world. And she had realized, somewhere in the midst of learning to live in this harsh, beautiful place, that she was falling in love with him. The week drew to a close, and on the final evening, Wyatt asked her to walk with him. They bundled up against the cold and made their way to a rise overlooking the ranch buildings. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, and the beauty of it made Evelyn's throat tight with emotion. "This is my favorite time of day," Wyatt said. "When the work is done and I can see what I have built, what I am working toward, but lately it has felt empty, like something is missing." "What is missing?" Evelyn asked, though she thought she knew. "You." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You are what is missing, Evelyn. You fit here in this place, in this life. You fit with me. And I am hoping that you feel the same, because this week has been the happiest of my life, and the thought of you leaving tears me apart." Evelyn felt tears pricking at her eyes, but they were happy tears, tears of relief and joy. "I do feel the same. I did not expect to, did not think it was possible to fall in love so quickly. But Wyatt, I love you. I love your honesty and your strength and the way you make me feel like I matter. I love this land and this life and the future we could build together. Then stay." His voice was urgent now, his hands tightening on hers. "Marry me, Evelyn, not because it is convenient or practical, though it is both those things. Marry me because I love you, because you are the woman I want by my side for the rest of my life, because when I think of the future, all I can see is you." "Yes." The word came out as a whisper, but she repeated it louder, letting it ring across the snow-covered valley. "Yes, Wyatt, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and Evelyn felt the last pieces of her old life falling away, replaced by something new and bright and full of promise. His lips were warm despite the cold, and she melted against him, marveling at how perfectly she fit in his embrace, how right this felt. They were married in Yankton 2 weeks later, in a simple ceremony attended by Sarah and Joe Marsh, Tom Running Bear, and Evelyn's Aunt Margaret, who made the journey from her homestead to give her blessing. Margaret took one look at the way Wyatt and Evelyn gazed at each other and pronounced herself satisfied. "You have found what I found when I came west," she told her niece. "Freedom to be yourself and someone who loves you for it. That is worth more than all the respectability in Philadelphia." The winter months that followed were hard but happy. Evelyn learned to love the isolation of the ranch, the way the snow muffled sound and created a world that was just the two of them. She and Wyatt grew closer with each passing day, learning the intimate details of married life, discovering the pleasure of sharing not just a bed but a life. Wyatt was an attentive husband, patient with Evelyn's inexperience and generous with his affection. He made her laugh with his dry observations about the livestock, impressed her with his competence in handling problems, and showed her in 1,000 small ways that she was cherished. And Evelyn blossomed under his care, her confidence growing as she mastered the skills needed to be a rancher's wife. They worked side by side to improve the ranch, planning for the spring calving and discussing ways to expand the operation. Evelyn's mathematical skills proved invaluable in negotiating with suppliers and tracking expenses, and she discovered a talent for breeding that Wyatt encouraged. Together, they studied bloodlines and conformation, choosing which cattle to keep and which to sell, building a herd that would be the envy of the territory. When spring finally arrived, melting the snow and turning the valley green, Evelyn felt like she was watching the land come alive for the first time. Wildflowers bloomed in impossible profusion, painting the meadows in colors so vivid they seemed unreal. The cattle grew sleek on new grass, and the calves born that spring were strong and healthy. And as the weather warmed and the days grew longer, Evelyn realized that she was carrying Wyatt's child. She told him one evening in May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I am going to have a baby," she said, watching his face for his reaction. Wyatt went very still, and for a moment Evelyn worried that he was not pleased. Then he turned to her with an expression of such profound joy that it took her breath away. "A baby," he repeated. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. Happy does not begin to cover it. He pulled her close, one hand settling protectively over her still flat stomach. "You have given me everything, Evelyn. A home, a partner, and now a family. I love you more than I have words to express." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into the fall. Sarah Marsh appointed herself Evelyn's guardian angel, checking on her constantly and offering advice both solicited and unsolicited. Wyatt treated Evelyn like she was made of spun glass, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work, and they argued good-naturedly about what she could and could not handle. "I am pregnant, not incapacitated," Evelyn said more than once. "Women have been having babies since the dawn of time, Wyatt. I can still gather eggs and make bread." But she appreciated his concern, just as she appreciated the way he talked to her growing belly, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the life they would have. She loved watching him with the animals, seeing the gentleness in his strong hands and imagining him holding their baby with the same care. Their son was born in December, during a snowstorm that reminded Evelyn of the blizzard that had brought her and Wyatt together. Sarah and a midwife from Yankton attended the birth, and Wyatt paced the main room of the house, wearing a path in the floorboards until Joe finally dragged him outside to check on the livestock. When Evelyn's cries finally subsided and were replaced by the lusty wail of a newborn, Wyatt burst back into the house, his face white with anxiety. Sarah emerged from the bedroom with a smile on her face and a bundle in her arms. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy with lungs like a bellows." Wyatt took the baby with shaking hands, staring down at the red, wrinkled face with an expression of awe. "He is perfect," he whispered. "He is noisy," Evelyn said from the bedroom, her voice exhausted but happy. "Bring him here so I can feed him, and then we need to decide on a name." They named him William James Rutherford, and he was indeed perfect. He had Wyatt's dark hair and Evelyn's green eyes, and from the moment he entered the world, he made his presence known. He was a hungry baby, always demanding to be fed, and he grew quickly, his sturdy little body testament to good health. Wyatt was a devoted father, rising in the night to bring William to Evelyn for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, and carrying his son around the ranch in a sling that Tom Running Bear had made. He talked to William constantly, explaining the work of the ranch and pointing out animals and landmarks, and Evelyn would often find the two of them having one-sided conversations that made her heart swell with love. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. The ranch prospered under their joint management, growing from 50 head of cattle to more than 200. They built a larger barn and added more hired hands, including a young couple who became close friends. Evelyn's reputation as a shrewd businesswoman spread through the territory, and other ranchers began seeking her advice on matters of finance and breeding. William grew into a bright, curious boy who loved the ranch and everything about it. He learned to ride before he could raid, and he followed his father everywhere, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. And when he was 3 years old, Evelyn gave birth to a daughter they named Elena Rose. Elena was quieter than her brother, more thoughtful, with Evelyn's mathematical mind and Wyatt's steady temperament. She loved books and flowers and spent hours drawing pictures of the animals on the ranch. Where William was all energy and motion, Elena was stillness and observation, but the two children adored each other, and Evelyn and Wyatt marveled at the family they had created. As the children grew, the ranch continued to expand. Wyatt's dream of building something lasting had come true and more. He had a thriving operation, a loving wife, and 2 healthy children. But more than that, he had a partner who understood him, who shared his vision, and who made every day better just by being in it. On a cold November evening 12 years after the blizzard that had brought them together, Evelyn and Wyatt stood on the same rise where he had proposed, watching the sunset paint the snow in familiar colors. William and Elena were down at the house with Sarah Marsh, who still lived on the ranch despite her advancing years, and for a moment, it was just the two of them again. "Do you ever regret it?" Wyatt asked, slipping an arm around Evelyn's waist. "Giving up your life in Philadelphia, staying here with me?" Evelyn leaned into his embrace, thinking of everything they had built together. The ranch that was now one of the most successful in the territory, the children who were growing strong and happy, the community of friends and neighbors who had become like family, the deep, abiding love that had only grown stronger with each passing year. "Not for a single moment," she said. "That blizzard was the best thing that ever happened to me. It brought me to you, and you gave me the life I did not know I wanted. You gave me a home, Wyatt, not just this place, but a home in your heart. By spring, I refuse to let you go, Wyatt said, echoing the decision he had made all those years ago. I knew you were meant to be mine, and I was not going to let you slip away. Best decision I ever made. Best decision we both made, Evelyn corrected. I chose to stay, remember. I chose you and this life and everything that came with it. They stood together as the sun disappeared below the horizon, the sky turning from gold to purple to deep blue. Stars began to appear, diamond bright in the clear winter air, and from the house came the sound of their children's laughter. It was a perfect moment, the kind that Evelyn had learned to recognize and treasure, the kind that made up a life. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the inevitable changes of time. William grew into a fine young man who took over more and more of the ranch's daily operations, showing the same dedication and skill that his father had displayed. He fell in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a spirited young woman who matched him in stubbornness and heart, and they were married in a ceremony that brought together the entire community. Elinor surprised everyone by announcing her intention to become a teacher, and with Evelyn and Wyatt's blessing, she attended a college in the East before returning to the territory to open a school. She married a lawyer from Yankton, a thoughtful man who appreciated her intelligence and supported her work, and together they built a life that balanced tradition and progress. Wyatt and Evelyn grew older gracefully, their hair turning silver but their love remaining as strong as ever. They stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, letting William and his wife take over while they enjoyed the fruits of their labor. They traveled occasionally, visiting Elinor and her growing family, attending cattle shows and auctions where Evelyn's expertise was still sought after. But they always returned to the ranch, to the land that had brought them together and sustained them through decades of hard work and joy. They sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set, telling each other stories they had heard 100 times before but never tired of repeating. Sarah Marsh passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, and they buried her on the ranch in a spot she had chosen years earlier. Joe Marsh followed his wife 6 months later, and Tom Running Bear spoke words of blessing over both graves in his native Lakota language. The passing of their old friends reminded Evelyn and Wyatt of their own mortality, but they faced it without fear, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. On a spring morning 35 years after the blizzard that had changed both their lives, Evelyn woke in the bedroom they had shared for decades to find Wyatt watching her with a gentle smile. "Good morning, my love," he said, his voice rough with age but still warm with affection. "Good morning," she replied, reaching out to touch his weathered face. "What are you thinking about? About how lucky I am, how blessed. I pulled a half-frozen woman from a snowdrift and she gave me everything I never knew I wanted. A real home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving." He took her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "I love you, Evelyn. I have loved you from that first week when you argued with me about everything and made me laugh when I had forgotten how. I will love you until my last breath, and beyond if such things are possible." "I love you too," Evelyn said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You saved my life in more ways than one, Wyatt. You showed me what love could be, what a partnership should look like. You gave me children and grandchildren and a legacy that will outlast us both. I could not have asked for more." They spent the day together, walking slowly around the ranch that had grown far beyond Wyatt's initial vision. They visited William and his wife, who now lived in the house Wyatt had built all those years ago, and admired their 5 grandchildren, who were running wild in the spring sunshine. They rode out to the rise where Wyatt had proposed, moving carefully on horses that were as old as their riders, and sat together looking out over the land they had worked so hard to build. "This was worth it," Wyatt said. "Every cold winter, every hard season, every moment of doubt or difficulty. It was all worth it for this." "For what?" Evelyn asked, though she thought she knew. "For you, for us, for the life we created together." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes still as vivid as they had been the day they met. "By spring, I refused to let you go, and thank God I did. You are my heart, Evelyn. You always have been." They returned to the house as the sun was setting, painting the sky in the familiar colors they had watched together for decades. Their children and grandchildren gathered for dinner, filling the rooms with noise and laughter, and Evelyn looked around the table at the faces of the family she and Wyatt had created. This was their legacy, she thought. Not just the successful ranch or the financial security, but the love that bound them all together, the values they had passed down, the knowledge that family was everything. That night, lying in bed with Wyatt's arms around her, Evelyn thought back to the terrified woman who had stumbled through a blizzard so many years ago. That woman had been lost and broken, fleeing from a life that did not want her, convinced that she would never be enough. And then a cowboy with kind eyes and steady hands had pulled her from the snow, and everything had changed. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Wyatt murmured sleepily. "For refusing to let me go. For seeing something in me worth keeping. For giving me a life beyond anything I could have imagined." "Thank you for staying," he replied. "For taking a chance on a rough cowboy who had nothing but a dream and a stubborn heart. For making that dream into something real and beautiful." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the sounds of the ranch at night. The cattle lowing softly in their pens, the wind rustling through the trees, the creak of the house settling into itself. All the sounds of home. Evelyn lived to see her great-grandchildren born, to watch the ranch pass to the third generation of Rutherfords. She remained sharp and engaged until the very end, still keeping the books and offering advice when asked. When she finally passed away at the age of 82, surrounded by family and holding Wyatt's hand, she did so with a smile on her face and peace in her heart. Wyatt followed her 3 months later, his body simply giving up without the woman who had been his other half for so many years. They buried him next to Evelyn on the rise overlooking the ranch, and William carved their names into a single headstone along with the words, "Together in life, together in death, together forever in love." The ranch continued to thrive under William's management, and later under his children's care. The story of how Wyatt and Evelyn met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The sleigh that had carried Evelyn to safety was preserved in the barn, a reminder of the storm that had brought together two souls who were meant to find each other. And on winter evenings, when the snow fell and the wind howled around the ranch house, members of the Rutherford family would gather by the fire and tell the story again. About the blizzard of 1873, about a curvy woman forced into a sleigh by circumstance, and the cowboy who refused to let her go by spring. About a love that grew from desperate beginnings into something strong and enduring, something that built not just a successful ranch, but a family legacy that would last for generations. It was a love story for the ages, born of the harsh Dakota winter and tempered by years of hard work and devotion. It was proof that sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest blessings, that sometimes being forced off your planned path leads you exactly where you are meant to be. And it was a reminder that true love, the kind that lasts a lifetime and beyond, often comes when you least expect it, in forms you never imagined. The ranch still stands today, more than a century after Wyatt Rutherford pulled a freezing woman from a snowdrift and changed both their lives forever. The land has been passed down through 5 generations now, and while much has changed, much has also remained the same. The values of hard work, honesty, and family that Wyatt and Evelyn instilled are still evident in every aspect of the operation. Their great-great-grandchildren still ride the same valleys Wyatt and Evelyn once explored together, still watch the same sunsets paint the same hills in gold and purple. And when winter storms blow through, bringing snow and wind that transform the landscape into something dangerous and beautiful, the family remembers. They remember the blizzard that started it all, the storm that forced 2 strangers together and gave them the chance to discover that they were meant to be anything but strangers. In the main house, now much expanded from the original structure Wyatt built with his own hands, there hangs a portrait of Evelyn and Wyatt painted when they were in their 50s. In it, Evelyn sits on a chair wearing a simple blue dress that complements her still vibrant eyes, her hair gray but her face still showing the beauty that had nothing to do with conventional standards. Wyatt stands behind her, one hand on her shoulder, his weathered face softened by the smile he reserves only for her. The love between them is palpable even in painted form, a testament to a bond that survived everything life threw at it and emerged stronger for the trials. Beneath the portrait is a plaque with words William had engraved shortly after his father's death. In memory of Wyatt and Evelyn Rutherford, who proved that the greatest loves often begin with the worst storms, and that a heart brave enough to stay is a heart brave enough to build something that lasts forever. Visitors to the ranch sometimes ask about the couple in the portrait, drawn by the obvious affection captured by the artist's brush. And the Rutherfords, whoever is on hand to answer, always smile and tell the story. They tell about the blizzard of 1873, about a woman facing death, and a man with a sleigh and a kind heart. They tell about a week in a cabin that turned into a lifetime of love, about a curvy woman from Philadelphia who found her home on a Dakota ranch, about a lonely cowboy who discovered that his real fortune was not in cattle or land, but in the woman who chose to stay with him. They tell about spring, when the snow melted and the world came alive again, when Wyatt looked at Evelyn and knew he would never let her go. And they tell about all the springs that followed, each one a renewal of vows made in love and kept with devotion, each one a reminder that the best things in life are often the ones we never planned for, the ones that come to us in the midst of storms we thought would destroy us. The story always ends the same way, with the listener understanding that what they have just heard is not simply a tale of romance, but a story about choosing to be brave, about taking chances when the safe path would have been easier, about building something real and lasting through hard work and unwavering commitment. It is about 2 people who saw in each other something worth fighting for, and who spent their lives proving that initial instinct right. And somewhere, in whatever place spirits go when they leave this earth, Wyatt and Evelyn Rutherford are still together, still holding hands, still watching sunsets over a land they loved and nurtured, still grateful for the blizzard that forced them together and the love that made them refuse to let go. Their story is complete, their legacy secure, their love eternal. From a desperate rescue in a winter storm to a family empire built on devotion and hard work, from strangers to soulmates to ancestors whose influence still shapes the living, they traveled the full circle of a life well lived and a love fully realized. The curvy woman was forced into his sleigh by circumstance and survival, but by spring, the cowboy refused to let her go by choice and love. And in the end, that made all the difference.